and this is like one of the few times I would actually take into account like the time it takes to take off and put on armor,
Yeah.
because full plate takes a while to put on.
So, first up on the show, we are going to do a mechanically speaking. And, Alex, you already know what we're mechanically speaking about, but I'm sure you're excited anyway to find out. So, as you know, we have been playing a little of the Dungeons and the Dragons. And,
No dragons have appeared yet.
well,
Just dungeons.
we're getting there. I think. Maybe.
Potentially.
Okay.
Anyways.
The point is, in the most recent quest that we went on, we ended up in a bit of a fight, a tussle of sorts, with some wererats. A subject that we will probably talk about in another capacity on the next episode. But, during that, our crew had to figure out how they were going to fight these wererats. And as you probably got from that interaction, I was not very familiar with lycanthropes in general and if they had strengths or weaknesses.
Right. None of you as players or characters were very familiar with lycanthropes or the like.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I never really had a reason to understand what they were until this very moment. And so a lot of our characters, though, are just dealing with common slashing and bludgeoning and piercing weapons. The bows and the swords and such, and the daggers. And
in my great club.
And your great club, yeah.
But essentially, yeah, most of you are martial classes.
Yeah.
Except for you as a bard, who, again, you have a bit of spell casting that you can do damage and stuff with, but you're not like a wizard throwing fireballs.
Right. Not yet. That's not...
Or you're not a warlock that's just using a cantrip to do D10 damage every attack.
Every single time? Yeah, no, also not there yet. But the only things I really have for spells that were going to work were like thunder spells, but I guess the thing is that once I started realizing that the slashing and everything wasn't working very well, my next thought was, oh, is thunder damage gonna do much to them? And then I was thinking to myself, well, realistically, if they're rats, the only thing I can think that would probably really be bad for them is like fire. And
yeah,
there's a problem with that, as you probably know. The Bard spell list does not have a lot of fire spells involved.
Yeah, because I had been explaining when you guys attacked. I was letting you attack. I wasn't telling you they were immune to damage, but I was describing it as, so you hit and like roll for damage, and like you hit it and like your sword doesn't really cut into it. It doesn't feel like it's doing a lot of damage to them.
Right.
For instance. Because now we're aware that lycanthropes, as rules written, have damage immunity to anything that is non-magical and non-silvered. Or, sorry, non-magical or non-silvered. Doesn't have to be both, just one or the other.
Boy, if you had to find that specific weapon that was both of those things, that would have been something else. And honestly, most people are not going to think to have a silvered weapon unless they are specifically fighting lycanthropes.
Or Fae. Fae might be cold iron, but one of the items you can actually buy that you can find sometimes, depending if it's in 5e, I think it is. I'm not sure if it's in the town you're in, but alchemical silver can be found, which is like a bottle that you basically coat a weapon, and it's doesn't last permanently, but it coats it in a thin layer of silver so you can overcome damage reduction by silver.
I see. Okay.
Or immunities in that case.
Oh, okay. Maybe I should look into picking some of that up if it's available.
Well, does your character know that silver hurts them?
This is also true. I think I have to learn that in-game.
Yeah, a little bit.
I might have reason to find that out soon. Anyway.
So I believe in prior editions of D&D, lycanthropes and other creatures like that had damage reduction versus non-silver, for instance. So instead of doing, oh yeah, it's immune to all damage, it's like, okay, it's damage reduction like 5 or maybe 10 to any non-silvered attacks, as an example. So you would subtract 10 damage total, or 5 damage total, to any attack that was made with a weapon, or basically a weapon that was not silver or magic.
Got it. Yeah.
But now they're immune to damage that's not silver or magic.
Right. Yeah, we'll have to get into lycanthropes on the next episode, because that's a whole other kettle of fish that we're going to have to analyze. But for purposes of this conversation, immune to these damages, and that kind of puts several of the characters out of commission for dealing damage, except, of course, for the few that actually had something akin to elemental powers. Now, I was looking at this thinking, fire would probably be good. Rats typically don't like fire. I'm gonna guess a wererat probably is still not fond of fire. That was my logic. But I only have one fire spell. And my one fire spell is heat metal.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who are not familiar with heat metal, it is a very interesting spell, but it is a bit situational. The idea behind it is that a constructed weapon, a manufactured weapon, I should say, that is made of metal, you heat it up, and it deals damage to the entity that is currently wielding it. It can be like weapons or really supposed to be any kind of metal object or metal armor. And so the first thing I ask is, okay, any of them wearing anything metal?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no. They're in leather armor.
They weren't even wearing armor.
So they got no armor for me to work with.
I mean, when you're immune to all damage that's non-magical, non-silver, why would you even bother?
Yeah. So the next thing I think to myself is, well, maybe I could target their weapons, because they had short swords, I think.
Yeah.
And so I go, okay, I could cast heat metal on the sword, and then they would take damage, and maybe they would drop their sword. That's also a possibility. But then we had a bit of a confab because of a little technicality that, granted, I've thought about myself, which is, technically, where the monster is holding on to the short sword, or really anyone, is probably leather-bound, and therefore they're not really touching metal.
Yeah.
So to speak.
And it wasn't me going, yeah, that won't work, because I wanted to nerf your spell. It was one of the other players brought that up. And then as a group, we all kind of had discussion and decided that, yeah, it makes sense that leather would insulate that short sword, so you wouldn't really feel any of the heat. It's like wearing a leather grilling glove when you grab something on the grill. It's hot. It's not going to burn you.
Right, exactly. So we made that ruling, and so then I was like, yeah, I really want to be able to do something with this. And I think it was you who actually suggested, or somebody did, well, if that's the case, maybe we can use it on one of our team members' swords.
Yeah.
And then, maybe it would do fire damage. So the way that we rectified all of that was Gwyn has a sword, and if I cast it on her sword, then she would have to make the Constitution saving throws and would take some fire damage, mostly just to see if she holds on to it. And if, regardless though, as long as I'm concentrating on it, we could have the effect, and the damage that would normally be done is added to the sword's hit value in fire damage. Yeah. And, I'm gonna kind of hand wave away the fact that the monsters wouldn't be affected by the heat, but Gwyn still was technically affected by it.
Yeah, we listen, we weren't thinking all the way through on that.
but I kind of think, if we really look at it, you're getting to add 2d8 to every one of your sword strikes, so, and it's like more of a permanent effect, the way we were adding it. Instead of the instantaneous, it's on like a flash and out, which is how heat metal usually works. It's not a continuous effect. I get that. I feel like in some ways I probably damaged Gwyn more than than the monsters did. I think I did more damage to Gwyn than the monsters.
A little bit. I mean, in hindsight, if we had let you use it normally,
yeah,
the wererats, I believe, still get their probably a claw and their bite attack, so they don't really need their swords. Plus, they also had, I think, like light crossbows or hand crossbows.
Sure, yeah.
So like they could have just dropped their sword and just been like, "All right, guess I'm gonna use my teeth."
Right. I mean, I figured I'd at least get some good, like, straight damage on it, because the thing I do like about heat metal is that if it is in the right situation, it starts off as like a 2d8 fire damage spell that has no saves, and it doesn't even have like a spell ranged attack. You just do the damage. You just do it. And then if they're holding on to the sword, if they keep holding on to the sword, or they have the armor on, you can keep doing that as a bonus action for the entire length of the concentration spell. So you get good damage you can use over a long
so if you're fighting someone with full plate,
you devastate them.
Yeah.
It's
especially because then you have to take into account, and this is like one of the few times I would actually take into account, like, the time it takes to take off and put on armor.
Yeah.
Because full plate takes a while to put on.
Yeah.
And a while to take off. Even hastily, it takes a while to take full plate off. Now, a breastplate, sure, might take you a round, because you just kind of undo the buckles and throw it off, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But
it's hard for them to actually take it off, and you'd think that you'd probably be able to reliably do it, and it would last for as long as concentration isn't broken. You get about 10 rounds out of it, and being able to use it as a bonus action is pretty great. The other thing that's really great about heat metal, though, is if they fail the constitution saving throws, which I think is the other part of this. If they're wearing the object and take damage from it, they have to succeed on a constitution saving throw and drop the object. And if they can't get away from the object, then they also get disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks until your next turn when you do it again.
So I just looked it up really quick, too, by the way.
Yeah.
The time it takes to don and doff, apparently, is the word they're using in this case.
Yeah.
To get in and get out of different armor types. Light armor takes a minute to put on and a minute to take off.
Got it.
Generally speaking. Medium armor takes 5 minutes to put on, 1 minute to take off.
Okay.
So it's still easy to take it off. Guess what heavy armor is, though? In this.
God, it's got to take, what, almost a half hour to put on or something?
It takes 10 minutes to put it on, and it's 5 minutes to take off heavy armor.
Okay.
You can reduce the time in half with help.
Oh, yeah.
So even at the minimum of like getting someone to help you take off your heavy armor, which then takes another person out of commission during the combat.
Yeah.
So if you use heat metal on someone with full plate, it would either take them 5 minutes to take the armor off, or 2.5 minutes with help, but taking a second person. And that is, 10, 20, 25 rounds of combat.
Yeah, it's 25 rounds.
They're not getting out of that before that spell ends in the time combat is actually taking.
No. And if we do the math, your duration is a concentration spell. It's up to 1 minute, so I've got this for like 10 rounds. And so it's 2d8 fire damage every single round that I can do as bonus actions, and that's only one spell slot that I have to use. So after that ends, I just kind of go, well, screw it, I'll burn another second level spell slot for the next 10 rounds. Yeah. Why not? Because it ends up being 20d8 fire damage, basically.
That's a lot. 20d8 is a lot of damage.
Oh yeah, it sure is.
I mean, it's over the entire course of combat, mind you, but
yeah,
it's free damage.
Yeah, I can be casting other spells as regular actions in the meantime, and then just, like, snap my fingers as a bonus action. It's just like, yep, more heat damage, just keep going. And considering that you keep having to do saving throws and there is no reduction of damage or anything like that, it's a very reliable spell.
Yeah, you're just lucky that the Lycanthropes didn't have fire resistance, too.
Yeah, that would have been
Shame they weren't
terrible.
Tiefling Lycanthropes.
Oh my god, yeah, that would have been annoying. Annoying indeed. So anyway, our workaround for that was just using it on one of our party members' swords, and I guess we did have to inadvertently really reinterpret the way the spell is supposed to be. Like, I don't know if it would be something I would suggest as a regular usage of the spell, because I think it feels a little broken. Because as a fighter who can get, like, action surge, Gwyn had one round where she was able to do, like, 4 straight attacks, and we were adding the 2d8 fire damage for each one, which is good for us especially, but does seem like in normal usage this would become kind of a problem, even if the fighter is taking some damage and potentially dropping the sword and have to pick it up, you know.
Right.
A very unreliable flaming sword attack. Now, from the perspective of a GM, is this something that you would recommend having seen it in practice for somebody else who was trying to use the spell that way?
Like, using it the way we used it?
Yeah.
I think if you have a situation like we did, where there wasn't really an effective way to deal with the Lycanthropes by most of the party,
Yeah.
I think it's okay to modify spells in weird ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think doing that in general can be fun, because, you know, the rules are there as a guideline.
Sure.
But, like, using spells in inventive ways is always fun. Like you talked about one of the times before, making a maze.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
For instance, or I've mentioned using my Thorn Whip as a way of traversal.
Sure.
For my druid.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fine, because then it lets the players roleplay a bit.
Sure.
And tinker with the mechanics in ways that they're not written specifically, but ways that are within the rule set to let them work.
Got it. Yeah.
You know, I think it's fine, especially if you're overcoming certain obstacles that may be difficult in ways that are creative. So
yeah, and I started to realize when I was looking at wererats, because I was like, oh, these can't possibly... Lycanthropes really do get total resistance to all of these? That's crazy. I saw comments on on D&D Beyond where they were like, that particular quest in that particular module seemed to have tripped up a lot of game masters who had new players, because it is very much a new player quest line. And when they got to that part in the Icespire Peak, a lot of them wound up with some real problems. A lot of players that just simply didn't have the means to effectively fight, and I'm gonna guess a lot of them weren't able to drive half of them away at the start.
yeah, and I let you do that before I even looked at their stats and was like, oh shit, right, they have immunities.
Yeah. So one of the things I had seen, they had some different workarounds, and we can talk about that.
One way you can deal with that, for instance, as a GM, would be to say, instead of their immunities, giving them resistance so they have half damage.
Yeah.
Is one way you can deal with that. Another would be if you pre-read these things the way I don't, you could leave maybe in some of the other quests you've done leading up to it, or at the beginning of the mine, maybe some easily findable silvered weapons.
Oh, sure.
Or there should have been some like hints, or like something that's be like, you know, oh, there's lycanthropes in this forest, or somewhere there have been lycanthropes, or some information, you know, or maybe a note you found that's like, yeah, there are lycanthropes, and, you know, they really don't seem to like silver.
Yeah, or like the guy who who led us to the mine, Don John, that guy, like, he might have had information about, like, lycanthropes if he's dealt with, like, he obviously didn't like them. So, maybe he would know.
Here's an example that probably could have worked really well. You guys went to the mine, met the wererats, and then they sent you to the shrine to get rid of the orcs and ogres. Well, why didn't the orcs and ogres have things that wererats didn't like?
Yeah.
Maybe the orcs and ogres should have had silver weapons. Because otherwise the wererats really have no reason to be scared of them.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Unless there were some orc mages or something around that they were worried about, but...
Right. So, like, maybe that should have been a thing where, oh yeah, they ask you to go do this to take care of them, and while you're taking care of these orcs, you find it kind of strange that all of them have some silvered weapons, and maybe there's a note on one of them talking about how, like, oh yeah, maybe it's just an orcish, so you have to be able to read orcish.
Sure.
But maybe it says, yeah, got rid of the diary entry, or it's like we can orcs writing diary, yeah. But maybe it's like, oh, we had to take care of these wererats. They really didn't like our silver weapons, like something like that.
Yeah.
So then you could have looted them, taken their silvered weapons, and then gone back. And once the wererats were like, oh yeah, we're not fucking leaving, you could have been like, oh cool, well how about this fucking silver sword? And they were like,
yeah, that would have been a problem. I do like the idea of orcs just writing in their diaries.
Dear diary.
Today I raided a camp, beheaded a couple farmers. Things went well.
Perfect.
Start living my best life. But there's that. Or, actually, the thing that we ended up doing is we kind of turned the torches into almost like a simple weapon.
Yeah.
And allowed them to do like 1d4 fire damage, and
I let them do more damage than they should have done.
Yeah, I think technically they do 1 damage.
Yeah, I didn't really want the combat to drag out for another hour.
Yeah. And then inevitably, when I was like, well, I'll just see if they can take psychic damage, and I just vicious mockery to cover 1 or 2 of them. It's like, yeah, that works. That also works. Let's do that. I guess I figured that they were at least not immune to spells because I was able to use sleep, so I figured, well, maybe they'll take damage from some other sources, but, anyway, creative use of heat metal, not necessarily something I would recommend. I imagine the way that it's written is that even if there is a leather handle, it's technically a manufactured metal object. You'd probably, I think most people would assume that it would work on it since it's a manufactured object itself. But hey, I think it made for a much more interesting encounter doing it the way we did. So
definitely.
So everyone out there, if you have used a spell, maybe it was heat metal, maybe it was something else, in a role-playing game in an interesting way that is probably unorthodox for the rules as written, please let us know. I'm curious as to the creative means by which everybody goes about making the spells their own, so to speak.